Hey guys, it's the Flame here, back again with another video, and today I'll give my thoughts on part 3 of JoJo's. But before we begin, I have a few things to say before we start. For one, I've already recorded this video but decided not to upload it because I thought it wasn't good, so this video would take its place, and hopefully it doesn't get blocked again. But now let's start the video, shall we? My overall thoughts about part 3. It was good, but there are some things I disliked as well. Now, something that part 3 does very well is the hero's journey. Now, if you don't know what the hero's journey is, I'll explain every part of it and how part 3 does it well. So let's begin with the ordinary world. With this one, is self-explained, pretty much introduces the main character as a normal human in a normal setting, and it has the hero discovers a new world, which happens with Jotaro. First couple panels explains how person he is, then later in the same chapter, he says he has an evil spirit, which is a stand. This is what the ordinary world part of the story does. We learn about Jotaro's childhood, and we learn about Jotaro's mom's flashback when we see him in the present talking about and showing the police and his evil spirit showing that he's left his normal life behind, which leads into the call to adventure. Essentially sets up on why the main characters have to leave their normal lives behind, as they're a problem they can't ignore. And now the way part 3 does it, they don't do it in a traditional way. But it still works by having Joseph come in with Abdul, get Jotaro out of jail, while also explaining what a stand is and how they work. Once that is done, Joseph explains to Jotaro and the audience on what the main plot of the stakes of this part is. Dio has returned with the body of Jonathan and has unlocked his stand. As well, for the stakes, Dio used a curse to infect Jotaro's mom with a stand that she can't handle, and if they don't kill Dio in 60 days, she would die. Dio would likely conquer the entire world if he isn't stopped. What part 3 is doing well is following the hero's journey, and every chapter contributes to this. Next, I'm going to combine refusal of call and meeting the mentor. Both sound exactly what they are supposed to be. Refusal of call for part 3 does an interesting way by having to be where they don't know exactly where Dio is. And for meeting the mentor, it happens twice. You have Joseph and Jotaro and Polnareff and Abdul. Now Polnareff and Abdul is more apparent than Joseph and Jotaro, because Abdul teaches Polnareff numerous times while Joseph only does it once. But I will say Jotaro didn't need a character arc, just needed development. Then you have the crossing the first threshold, pretty much the no turning back point in the story. This happens after Polnareff joins the squad, or you can say when Iggy joins, but I'll say it's once Polnareff joins, because that happens once the story gets fully started, while Iggy joins right after they get to Egypt. Now I will get into test, allies, and enemies. Just like some of the other self-explanatory ones, I won't have to explain what this is. I'll just go through on how part 3 does this. Now we'll start with test. Now it tests Polnareff more than anyone else. He has test against Hangman, then the next time he has another test against Vanilla Ice in his fight against him. Then with allies, this happens more in later parts, but it does happen with Kakyoin and Polnareff and Iggy once he comes into play. Then enemies. I mean, there's a bunch of enemies in part 3. We also have to approach the innermost cave now. This is pretty much the most dangerous spot in the story. Now this is once Iggy and the Crusaders find Dio's mansion and approach the innermost cave, where the ultimate goal is of the quest. Following, we have the ordeal, which is where the protagonist hits a rock bottom, either physically, mentally, or both. Some writers call this the black moment or the belly of the whale of the story. Now this happened 2 or 3 times in part 3. It happens with Polnareff and Jotaro. Polnareff with Hangman and Whole Horse once they kill Abdul. It's later revealed that he survives the attack though, but yeah. And against Vanilla Ice when he kills Iggy and Abdul, his actual death. For Jotaro, it happens once he's fighting Dio for the first time, and the second time when Dio absorbs Joseph's blood. Next, we have the reward, or the seizing the sword. This is pretty much the reward moment where the object or knowledge the hero fought throughout the entire journey to hold. For example, Luke rescuing Princess Leia and captures the plan for the Death Star keys to defeating Darth Vader, as well as now this happens of course with Polnareff and Jotaro. Polnareff when he was with Kakyoin in the car driving away from Hangman, trying to figure out his stand ability, and again with him with Vanilla Ice when he gains the resolve to fight him and beat him by learning he is a vampire. Then with Jotaro when he learns he can stop time and can move while time is stopped as well. Then we have the rollback where the story isn't over yet. Pretty much the hero has to deal with the aftermath or consequences of his previous actions. Now this happens when Jotaro learns how to move and stop time, but Dio goes over to Joseph and takes his blood and then can stop time for 10 seconds to beat him. Finally, you have the return with the elixir, where Hero gets to return home but has been a changed man from when they started their adventure, which is true for Polnareff and Jotaro when they first appeared to their last appearance in part 3. Again, what I like in the part was the good main cast. It was good, well, somewhat good main cast. I'll get to that in a minute. I'll start with Jotaro. He was a good main character. His character development from being somebody who loses cool very easily to being more of a mature person by the end of the part is good. But I can't say that much about his character because it continues after part 3 all the way up to part 6. In part 3, his character arc doesn't get pushed to the front line until they arrived at Egypt. But I will say Jotaro was overshadowed by Polnareff, which does happen in a lot of parts, which is a perfect segue to the GOAT of the part, Polnareff. I've already done a video on him about Polnareff, but I'm waiting for it to be edited by my homie Ty. Check it out once it's finally done. Polnareff's revenge arc is so good, and his character arc going from being a loner who only cares about himself to being someone who cares for his friends and even wanting to finish one of his friend's goals after he thought he died is so good. Now let's continue to Kakyoin. He was alright, nothing special. One of the more lacking characters out of the main cast because he simply did not do that much in the story. He had a couple fights, sure, but the entire main cast had fights. Well, maybe besides Avdol, who had less fights than him, but I'll get to him later. Anyways, Kakyoin is nothing special, and I can't really say that much about him. He's just alright. His final character arc happens in the final arc, but when he's finna die, and there's not that much else I can really say, he's just alright. Guess I'll do Avdol next. He was good all the way up to his first death, which did come to a shock for me. I even felt sad for him on his first death, and then once he came back, I was surprised. Then he goes to being the same as Kakyoin, just alright. Maybe worse than him because Kakyoin at least wins this fight, but Avdol, this dude has been hyped up since the early arcs, just struggles against most enemies and only serves as a way for Polnareff to finish his character arc and grow as a character, and then dies again to Vanilla Ice, which I didn't feel bad for him, just surprised Araki would do this again, honestly. I feel more sad for Iggy, especially Iggy when he actually died, and Polnareff when I thought he was gonna die. Now let's do Iggy. He was good. I liked his fight against Pet Shop, and I liked how he slowly became more friendly with the Crusaders to the point where he was willing to sacrifice himself for Polnareff, which was a good scene. Not much I can really say about him though, because he only showed up in the final arc. Now finally, Old Man Joseph. He was cool. I liked him. His humor was funny 9 out of 10 times. But here's the thing, I haven't read part 2, but I will once I have time to do it. But besides that, his fights were solid. His fights were more strategic than most of the other fights in this part. Now the fights in part 3 are good. What's more interesting about the fights in part 3 are that there's some fights that aren't fights, for instance. The Darby Brothers fights, where the Stardust Crusaders have to gamble to beat one of them, and they have to play a racing game and a baseball game to beat the other one. But every fight is interesting in its own way, and I like how the Sun stand user, where they didn't know they were being followed by the stand user, but he was using a mirror to reflect the landscape. Then you have fights like Gab and Doel, and if you don't remember who that is, that's the blind person who can use the water handstand. He was able to attack the Crusaders by hearing them move, and the fact that he was so far away makes this more entertaining on how the Crusaders will beat him. But enough with the small time fights. Time for the better fights, like the Vanilla Ice fight, my favorite fight in the part. And then you have the Dio fight. Both are good, but let's use the Vanilla Ice fight. It has you rooting for Polnareff the entire fight, and it also gets you emotional by having Vanilla Ice kill 2 characters off. But then, before he dies, seeing Polnareff beat him by finally pushing him into the sun and seeing Avdol and Iggy show up before going to Joe Heaven, the payoff was amazing. The same goes for the Dio fight. Now this is a very good segue to talk about the ending. It was good seeing them beat Dio and also having everything solved and also knowing how far they came to getting here. And just knowing how much both Polnareff and Jotaro changed from the beginning of the story, and also knowing the people they lost but made it where without them they wouldn't be here. So this was so good. Now it's time to dive into some of the bad things about part 3. Only one big thing is the one-off villains. Now that's not that bad. It's very hard to make one-off villains, but in later parts like part 4 or even 5, their villains are completely different from one another and their motives are different as well. While in part 3, the only thing they're doing is for money, and there are only a few villains that join the besides money. But besides that, part 3 was good. But be ready for more JoJo videos like Koichi, Kira, even the Squadron videos, and future stuff.
Yeah, big old drip, make a bitch like my pick. Yeah, she so thick, get the bitch once, don't miss. Yeah, I'm so rich, yeah, I could bust down the whole little wrist.